Book of Monsters, day 1. Date is the 25th of the 8th, 2017. Scene 1, slate 1, take 1. Action.
So we finished our first feature film, The Creature Below, back in 2016, and myself and Paul really wanted to get into something a bit different for the second film. The Creature Below was very slow burn and it was more of a psychological horror, but Paul and I absolutely love the 80s. We love John Carpenter, we love Peter Jackson's early work, Sam Raimi, and we really wanted to kind of channel the stuff that we loved about that era of film. So puppets, practical effects, buckets of gore. So Book of Monsters originally was a short film script we had called Sweet 16. We wanted to do a really fun, short horror movie with lots of practical monsters, and the story was about a girl who was living in a world where when you turn 16, as a rite of passage, as a coming of age story, you had to fight 6 monsters that showed up on your 16th birthday party.
Things didn't go according to plan.
Shit.
That was such a great little concept. Unfortunately, the short itself lacked substance in some respects, and it was just a gag. But we thought, we've got something here. It's worth investigating it and trying to build on that very basic premise.
So we took that original concept, and really it was all driven by our desire to do practical effects and monsters and make a fun film, a film that you can eat popcorn and just sit back and have a laugh.
So we had an initial idea, this very loose little concept that we knew we could build on and grow. We love the idea of the potential for all the different monsters that we could bring into the mix, the crazy characters. It very quickly became a potential for lots of different avenues where we could take it.
Paul was able to come up with these amazing ideas for how the movie would work and the relationships between all the characters. And slowly together, we spent a number of weeks developing the idea for the movie and creating all these really fun characters that we wanted to see on screen.
So we settled on a trio of kick-ass girls to have as our main leads. We had Sophie, we had Beth, and we had Mona, all very distinct, but all likeable in their own right, but kind of misfits in some respects.
What Paul was able to do is inject an emotional core into the trio and actually give them substance, and they felt real, and they all have these journeys across the film, and they evolve as characters.
Let's do this.
So to take Book of Monsters from its original idea, which was the short film of about 5 minutes, all set around a single party, we knew that wouldn't last for a 90-minute film. And Stuart had the great idea of creating a film that was similar in scope to a choose-your-own-adventure story. Now, that really excited me, the idea that there could be multiple threads about, and us as creatives, not necessarily knowing which thread the audience would take.
Do you go down the dark corridor, or do you pick up a weapon and fight back against the monster, and you have to turn to page 42 to find out if you lived or died and continue the story.
So to do a choose-your-own-adventure story within the film setup, we needed to limit the choices that the audience could have, but still give them a real emphasis and real driving force of the narrative.
With Book of Monsters, we decided to go down the Kickstarter route with crowdfunding, and that was really interesting because that allowed us to apply that choose-your-own-adventure style story. So we thought, well, let's limit the audience's choices to 6 key things.
Choose a character's gruesome death. Choose a mysterious birthday present. Choose the uninvited guest. Choose the weapon of last resort. And choose the horror trope that must die.
Hello? Please? Yes, we need help now.
It's okay. The police are coming.
So choosing the monsters was one of the main choices that we thought would really engage with people and that we would love to do with a film. So we got a concept artist, Abigail J. Harding, who did these amazing bits of concept artwork so that people could actually choose a monster from each of the 6 categories. And these are all based on archetypes from horror movies that we know and love. So you have the slasher, you have your Jason Voorhees type of character, you have your critter, which is like your gremlins from the movie, which we ended up with the gnomes, and you have your abomination abomination, which is your John Carpenter's The Thing type creature. And then you also have your supernatural creature, because obviously things like Paranormal Activity and The Conjuring are hugely popular. So we thought we've got to have a creature that's based on that archetype. We also had a shapeshifter character, which is the primary antagonist of the film. And letting people choose those was really exciting, because we had our ideas of what we really wanted to win, but ultimately it was up to the audience. And whilst I got my wish on some of them, the gnomes specifically, really wanted those in the film, some of them weren't what I expected people would choose, but it turned out great because we had these amazing monsters that were driven by the audience participation.
And very quickly people were getting really, really excited about this, and us as creatives were really excited to see where the film would be taken.
Shooting the Kickstarter proof of concept film was actually as much of a challenge as the film itself. We needed to make sure that the film got across the tone and style of the movie, got across the humour, and got across the kind of practical effects style of things that we wanted to make. But ultimately at the time, this was about 2 months before we actually started shooting the movie, which was completely dependent on us making the Kickstarter. So we hadn't made any of the monsters that you see around me now. We had very basic resources at our disposal, but luckily DDFX Studio, which is Paul, Mark and Natasha, came on board at that stage, and they were able to make us some really cool kind of gory effects to have in the proof of concept trailer. So we got to have Aaron, who eventually went on to play Carl in the film, come in as a comical pizza guy with his face all slashed up, which just looked absolutely amazing. We also borrowed a big werewolf costume from Mandala Studios, which is where Paul and Mark kind of do a lot of their work there, and they lent us this really cool werewolf that we had as a pixelated monster, because essentially it was going to be that the audience choose the monsters.
So what the hell is that thing?
You decide.
What?
We wanted to kind of get across the fun tone and style of the movie, and we thought what better way to do that than kind of a fake trailer. So the whole movie has that kind of cheesy 80s, 90s voiceover that you'd find in these old movie trailers.
For Sophie, tonight's the night. She finally becomes a woman.
How do I look?
But then twists it and addresses the audience directly and invites them to be involved in the movie. So when we ask them, you know, you decide, we really are asking the audience, like, you're going to decide these things. And I think that was really effective. And again, thankfully, we had the cast was already cast by this point, so we got them involved and they were able to kind of have a little taste of their characters by this point, because we were still working on the script at the time. What we did, which was quite fun to make sure that everything went to plan, is we actually filmed a video storyboard of the Kickstarter proof of concept trailer. I just did this at work with a few of my colleagues in the studio space that we were going to eventually use, completely undecorated, and we essentially went through the shot list and the script and filmed it on a phone and just edited it together. And that in itself I think is quite funny, especially when you look at it side by side with the final trailer. It is literally shot for shot what we ended up making. And I think I would recommend to anyone, if you've got the time, make a video storyboard. Just shoot your film on a phone with your friends or your partner and just get them to act in it, because then when you come to the day, what we did is we printed out all of those individual frames, we had them stuck to the wall, we were looking at those and referring to those the whole time, and I don't think we would have finished on time if we hadn't been as prepared as we were.
Doing the Kickstarter shoot was a lot of fun. It was a manic day. There was, in one room we were shooting the trailer, and in another room we were doing interviews and we were doing photographs. So it was kind of one thing after the other. Obviously coming onto a production like this, I was naturally nervous because it was my first lead role, but those nerves were very quickly gone with just how supportive everyone was and just how quickly we all bonded as well. The Kickstart was a lot of fun, and it gave us a little taste of what Book of Monsters, the film, was going to be like. But even just at the Kickstarter stage, when we were making that trailer, you could see the passion that people had, and just everyone was just putting their all into it.
6 monsters, 6 choices, 6 ways to die.
What the
Book of Monsters.
As soon as we made the Kickstarter target, it was time for me and Paul to get our act together and get that script ready and start doing all the shot lists and storyboards.
It wasn't like we were writing one single script, it was almost like we were writing several different potential angles for scripts to go. The interesting part of it for us was that we didn't necessarily know which direction the audience would take the film in. Me and Stuart always work on the story ideas together, and we are constantly bouncing ideas off one another and working on top of others' ideas and kind of building as we go along. With the story ideas itself, we had so many out there ideas and kind of random things that could happen and couldn't happen. It was a real kind of experience of coming up with everything and then scaling it down to what we could achieve, and also allowing the audience to choose which bits and bobs would be going in.
We knew we were thankfully able to get the studio space from Prime Studios, so we thought, well, let's write to what we can build essentially. So we thought we'll have the living room, a kitchen and a bedroom where the action could take place. The benefit of all of this was that we could have the characters go on their own little adventures, and the film didn't feel as enclosed as a lot of these contained low budget films do.
The joy of this is kind of twofold really. From a producing point of view, it allows you to say, right, we don't actually need all 10 cast members for a block of time. We can go away and separate them and shoot 2 cast members here, 2 cast members there, and separate the story into different rooms and put different characters together who might not naturally kind of fit together, allowing us to really investigate the conflict in that little mini story and keeps things fresh and popping when essentially the whole film is set around a house. I like to think it doesn't really feel that way. It feels like it moves quite a lot and there's a lot of action going on because we have multiple stories taking place at once with different cast members and different little interactions between themselves.
Whilst you've got Carl and Arya in the kitchen fighting the gnomes off, whilst you've got Sophie and Beth hiding behind the sofa, and then you've also got Michaela in the bedroom fighting the shapeshifter, then you've got the police showing up outside, and really it was making these little vignettes, these little action, little mini movies essentially that were happening that all had their own little tone and style. Writing the film was just genuinely one of the most fun experiences I've had making films, because we essentially just went, what do we want to see in an 80s throwback action movie? We had to have gremlin or critter type monsters in it, which eventually became the gnomes, and we just thought, well, we need to have a scene where people are attacking those in a kitchen like in Gremlins. So we were like, well, let's just do it, let's just write that into the film.
So to be given the opportunity to play with characters in that way, to allow us to really pull out all the stops and have such a wacky, zany, crazy little sequence go on in a film in which other areas we kind of cut away to are playing a much more sinister vibe, have a much more darker elements to the horror involved. It was a real kind of pick and mix bag of horror conventions and horror scope, which was brilliant to write and hopefully entertaining to watch as well.
For example, when the beast monster first enters the party, and that's our first kind of sight of a monster and it's just causing havoc, we just wanted to go full on crazy with it. So we wanted 6 awesome deaths to happen in that one scene alone. And that was one of the things that we were very keen for the Kickstarter audience to choose. The one that won out in the end was squeezed out the top like a tube of toothpaste, which was really fun just to imagine how you would do that. But we got to do that in the film with one of our actors. He got to be stomped on and slowly squeezed until his head became so big it popped. And that was really fun to do. We had a girl who got her guts ripped out. We had a guy who got his head bitten off and eaten. All the while, you've got me and Paul stood behind the monitor laughing our heads off.
One of my favourite parts of the film to write, and also when it was shot, was the scenes with Arya and the stripper guy, or Carl, taking place in the kitchen. It was a real joy to put those 2 characters together. This kind of clown-like stripper guy who was a bit of a bumbling idiot, who didn't really know what was going on, didn't know how to handle himself, and this cold-hearted bitch of a character who doesn't really take much shit, and just have them interact in a really highly stressful situation with monsters attacking at the door. They have to work together very quickly. They have to kind of form this alliance in very strange situations, and a lot of comedy came out of that.
I've had to break myself up my own handcuffs a few times.
So casting is always one of my favourite parts of filmmaking, because you've got these characters in your head from the script, but you finally get to kind of put a real face to them. Casting the lead character Sophie was actually quite a challenge, because you had to get someone you could really, the audience needed to empathise with this person, and they need to feel really down to earth, because in a crazy film like ours, where a lot of the humour comes out of the absurdity of the situation, of the gore, of the monsters, you needed a character at the centre of it to humanise the whole situation. And we found Lindsay Crane for that role, and yeah, I'm so glad we did. We'd actually worked with Lindsay a number of times on some short film projects, but when it came to our first feature film, she didn't really fit any of the characters. When we came to Book of Monsters, we thought of Lindsay straight away for the role of Sophie, and she did an incredible job and blew us all away.
This is actually Lindsay's first lead role in a feature film, which is bizarre when you watch the film because she was so natural and so incredibly dedicated to the role. She really holds the attention of the audience throughout, and very quickly the audience are emotionally connected with Sophie's plight. This was all down to Lindsay's dedication, both on set and prior to set. We had many conversations about Sophie's motivation at every given moment. Lindsay had a whole big booklet full of all of her notes and annotations and ideas on certain areas and the backstory and how Sophie would do a certain task or say a certain thing. So as a writer and as a producer, it's an absolute joy to be working with actors that give so much to the role and can increase the role and really round that character out before even the cameras start rolling.
I was really able to look into her background, and I really wanted to establish her as a person, so I could really get stuck into the role. Paul was really open to and gave me a lot of freedom to work with that. And even when we were on set, I was able to speak to Paul and maybe say, no, maybe she'd say this or do this in a different way. And even with the interactions with Michaela and Lizzie, and I think that's what was really great and why the chemistry between the three of us was really brought to life, because we were given that freedom with the dialogue and with the way we interact with each other.
We always wanted Sophie to be relatable. She needed to be an every woman so that anyone who watches it can kind of see themselves in it. Sophie builds throughout the film to become a kick-ass monster killer, but she has to do it gradually, and she doesn't do it alone. And that's what I really love about the trio that we had at the centre, at the heart of this movie.
Hello, Mr. Gable.
Hello, Bethany. Mona.
Hi, Mr. J.
Michaela Longdon played Mona. Mona is a rough and tough, kick-ass girl who doesn't take any shit from anyone. Michaela really relished the opportunity and really enjoyed the kind of role of Mona because it just gave her the excuse to be a real badass from day one.
Lizzie Stanton plays Beth in the film, and she's our kind of introverted, like goth stereotype, which you'll see in a lot of 90s films. But she's super intelligent. She's the one who's kind of solving a lot of the problems or suggesting solutions to things, and takes charge of the situation, especially when the book comes into the picture. She's the one going, okay, we've got this resource now that's clearly caused all this. Let's figure out what's going on. Lizzie actually auditioned for Michaela's role in The Creature Below. Michaela obviously ended up getting the role just because we felt she was right for the part. But Lizzie did an amazing audition, and we said from the moment after the audition, we're going to have you in a film at some point. And when we were coming up with the idea of having Beth as a character, we just thought, right, Lizzie's perfect for this. So that role was pretty much written for Lizzie, and she did an amazing job, especially when you put the three of them together. There's such a great trio.
Working with Michaela and Lizzie was fantastic. They are both such incredible actresses. And the first time we really met was on the Kickstarter, and we just clicked. We're now really, really good friends. And I think that really shows on screen. I think there's really strong chemistry between the three of us. Every scene with them was just an absolute joy. There was some emotional scenes that I did with Lizzie, and then there was action scenes as well that we did with Michaela, and it was just so much fun. I would love to work with them both again.
Nicholas Vince plays Jonas, who is Sophie's father in the film. His role is really important in the movie in that it grounds Sophie in the domestic reality before all the kind of craziness kicks off. Sophie her family unit is suffering with the fact that her mother died when she was very young. Her father isn't coping, he's drinking, he's kind of a very awkward father around his daughter, yet he means well, and there is that desire for connection between the two. This was kind of an interesting angle to give a character, a horror movie, which is essentially a gore fest and a fun popcorn movie, because it does ground it in reality. It gives it a sense that these characters exist out there in the real world.
Lindsay and Nicholas together, they rehearsed the scenes, and Paul's script again was beautifully written, and watching them rehearse the scenes was quite emotional, and then being able to see it on screen just was absolutely amazing. And thankfully, like, the emotional heart to this film really is these two characters, and we couldn't find better actors to play them.
Daniel Thrace plays Gary, who is your typical hero. In any other movie, he would probably be your lead. Me and Stuart very early on played with the idea of having a recurring gag in which we essentially see a hero, but on the sidelines. He's certainly not the focus of the film. Dan was great at playing into that and really kind of giving Gary this progression from weakling, underdog, unseen kind of hero, and essentially escalating to a superhero kind of level at the end, where he's kicking ass, he's doing martial arts. It's really, really exciting. But to the rest of the cast and the rest of the characters, he's still that off the centre character. He's still not really the focus, which was a really nice moment to kind of play with the expectations of the audience, whereby we will say, yeah, this is still happening, we're still having these arcs going on, but actually they're happening at the sideline, and we're going to focus on the characters that you don't normally get to see lead in these films.
Who are you?
I'm Gary.
Good job, Greg.
Thanks for the drink, Gavin.
Grant here just saved our lives.
Anna Dawson, who played Olive in our first feature film, The Creature Below, we got her back to play Arya in this film, and she's your classic high school bitch. She's really Sophie's antagonist in the first part of the film before the monsters show up, and that allowed for some really great humour, especially when we paired her with Aaron Dennis, who plays Carl, who is the uninvited guest, which the audience chose, who was the stripper.
Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on!
We threw those two together because they're such a hilarious combination, especially when the gnomes start attacking them. And Aaron Dennis, we've known him for such a long time. We've worked with him before in some short films and seen him in a lot of stuff. And we were just dying to put him in this movie, and Carl seemed like the perfect character for it.
Ooh.
For the Kickstarter campaign, one of the choices was the uninvited guest. So it could have been a strippogram, it could have been a nosy neighbour, it could have been a religious preacher or a police officer. And we knew from the start we were just going to use Aaron for whichever one it was, because he could play it hilariously either way. Thankfully, it ended up being the strippogram, which was a source of great entertainment for us, because we kind of knew that typically in these films it would be a female strippogram, and we wanted to flip that on his head. So Aaron comes in as kind of the bumbling, inept strippogram that doesn't really get his clothes off more than he falls over, and he was absolutely hilarious. My main regret with Aaron's character of Carl is that we didn't keep him alive for longer, because unfortunately we killed him off about 2/3 into the film. A lot of people were quite disappointed by that because he was that funny. So we've learned our lesson there, is keep your funnier characters around a bit longer.
Great. Now I totally won't get my deposit back.
Hannah plays Jess in the film, and Jess as a character was quite key to the story. She's essentially the love interest for Sophie, but she's also best friends with Arya, who's Sophie's kind of rival at school. So her balancing act that she has to play in the movie of kind of keeping her popular friends essentially, and then getting with the outcasts like Sophie and Beth and Mona, and overcoming the kind of social stigmas that you kind of experience at school that we can all associate with, really. And also Hannah's just such a warm and loving and caring person, and those were the things that whoever played Jess had to embody. So we were really lucky to find Hannah, and I think they've got such a sweet relationship in the film. And when, you know, Sophie says we've got to stay to go save Jess, you're really kind of rooting for her because you want her to save Jess and you want to see them get together at the end of the film.
Working with Hannah, who plays Jess, was really great. Kind of seeing throughout the script that relationship grow. It was really nice to see that, you know, with all the craziness and the madness that's going on with the monsters. Hopefully the audience is just rooting for Sophie and Jess to get together. And it was really nice at the end, you know, after all that disgusting blood and everything that has been shot at me when the monster's been killed, there's just that moment where Sophie drops the chainsaw and she realises that Jess is right there, and, you know, they have that moment together. And it was just really wonderful to see that built throughout the film to that final moment where they do finally get together.
Julian Alexander plays Bryce in the film. We wanted to have your traditional high school jock, which isn't something that really exists in British culture. It's something we've taken from American films. And we wanted him to kind of be the boyfriend character of Arya, and really be a pain in the arse and a thorn in the side to Gary in particular, because we wanted to build up Gary's character by having all of the other characters build him down, essentially. So Bryce was an especially fun character on screen, but Julian, he does a lot of theatre, he does a lot of rapping, he does a lot of improv. He was absolutely hilarious on set.
I'll show you the whole world like Aladdin! We can make it work, okay?
Low budget film.
Every single scene that he was in, he was cracking everyone up, because ultimately I wouldn't call cut because I knew he was just going to keep improvising. So after the scene had ended and the actors had read the lines that were supposed to be there, he would just keep going. And a lot of that stuff is in the film because his comedic timing was absolutely hilarious. And I don't think it's bad to say that a lot of the other actors had quite a challenge keeping up with him. Yeah, he just made those scenes perfect.
Oh, fuck you.
Steph Mossman plays Pandora, which is a name that's never spoken on screen, but she's essentially the shapeshifter monster in the film. So she had kind of a really fun but challenging role to do, because essentially she had many scenes where she was completely covered in makeup. Paul, Mark and Natasha from DDFX Studio had her as the shapeshifter monster in full makeup and costume, where she had a full mask on, every part of her body was painted. She had arms, multiple arms like a spider coming off of her, with puppeteers, with green sticks kind of animating the whole thing. She also had to be the paranormal creature, which was the Djinn, where she's only on screen briefly, but she essentially had to be covered again, head to toe in makeup and all wet, and she was kind of like this water widow type character. And then she had to play kind of the femme fatale woman in the red dress who lures Dave at the party. So that was really fun to do, and she just did an amazing job, and you know, she didn't complain once. Dave plays Dave. We just called the character Dave because it was written for him. He's our hapless virgin who is killed by the shapeshifter, and when his blood is spilled on the book, that's what kind of kicks this whole thing off. He's amazing at playing the kind of funny foil for everybody else, and he really makes you laugh when you watch those scenes, especially when he's kind of having his sex scene on the bed. And then we got to flip it over when the shapeshifter has clearly taken on his form. He gets to play the kind of super cheesy, clearly the bad guy that no one really notices role, which the audience can kind of is in on the joke, and that was just great fun. Dave also had one of the most fun jobs. Well, it was fun for us, I don't know about him, but he had to don the Abomination makeup. So when the team go back to the bathroom towards the end of the film, we have Dave is now he's transformed into some sort of John Carpenter, David Cronenberg creature. We also were lucky enough to get Johnny Vivash back for this film. He plays a small role of Mr. Willis in the classroom scenes in the movie. We wanted to have a really stern, classic high school teacher for this one, and Johnny was able to step in to that role flawlessly. I'm just disappointed we didn't get to use him more. In hindsight, it would have been great to have Mr. Willis come back later in the movie to actually fight some monsters or be killed by monsters, but maybe we'll save that for the next one if there is one.
We were incredibly lucky to have access to Prime Studios in Leeds. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to make this film the way that it was shot. We essentially built a house almost inside one of the studios out of flats, which allowed us to shoot everything in one place, which allowed us to maximise our shooting time. We wasn't having to bounce from one location to the next. We shot for 13 days in the studio. We were also very lucky that Prime allowed us to use some smaller rooms that they had for a production office, a breakout room for actors to kind of rehearse and work with.
We had about 3 days to actually build the set from when we first got access into the studio. So we were running around setting up our production office in one room. The special effects guys had their room next door to that, where Natalie also had her costume set up. In the studio, we just got to work building the set, but with 3 days to build what's pretty much an entire house, it's a big challenge to do. So a flat would go up, and then the wallpaper would be going up by someone else, and then pictures would be hung on the wall, and then the next flat would be going up. And it was like the train was steaming down the tracks and someone was was laying the train tracks in front of it as we were going along. But that was really in the spirit of Book of Monsters as an independent film, as this is the time we had, and they made it work. So it ended up being that by the first day of shooting, one of the first scenes that we filmed was actually young Sophie and Sophie's mum in the bedroom, which was a really fun, creepy scene to do. It's got a lot of build-up and exposition, but also it's got a really good jump scare in it, and that was fun. But as soon as we called cut, you could hear them hammering away and sawing in the next room because they were still building the living room. So with scheduling, what we had to do is we scheduled, everything in the bedroom to start with because we knew that was finished. As soon as we wrapped in the bedroom, we went into the kitchen, and then they would finish off the corridor. So it was like a jigsaw puzzle, really, as we were making the film with production design working very hard to get stuff ready for us for the next day.
For the first 13-day block of the shoot, obviously we were in the studio, which was incredible to be in because the fact that they built the house, after a while you would forget that it was a set because it was so well dressed. You would just think you were in a house. The other thing that was at the studio was the vents, and that was a really cool scene to do because you were just crawling around on your hands and knees in this little vent. The way they were built, they were just, one vent this way and one this way, but the way it's filmed, you think that the vents are huge, and that's just testament to the crew and the way it's edited. But that was one of the highlights. It was really fun to do that.
One of the many challenges that we faced during the film was scheduling. When it came to actually shooting some of the big sequences in the film, like when the Beast first attacks the house, that was quite hard because ultimately there's about 30 characters in that one room. There's the party goers and then there's your main cast. And getting them all there for that length of time and trying to shoot, the monster killing people and then the reverse of Sophie and Mona screaming and getting blood splattered on them would have just been impractical. So what we had to do is be quite clever and really go through the shot list and know exactly how the film was going to be edited together. And then we had an entire day where we filmed the girls reacting to the monster coming in through the door, screaming, getting blood splattered on them and running away, but the monster wasn't there. So we then filmed the monster killing all the party guests in a whole separate day, which was just a day of pure blood and guts. But we had to be really clever about it, and that could have, if we hadn't planned very well, that could have fallen apart because ultimately Lindsay and Michaela were screaming at something that wasn't there at all. I was just going, that's where the person's going to get the guts ripped out, and over there, that's where so-and-so gets his head crushed. So that was really fun as a challenge to do, but ultimately we had to embrace that on a lot of the film. So there's many instances where you'll see 3 or 4 characters in a room having a chat with each other, but at the time no one was actually there to act opposite them. It was all filmed on separate days, and hopefully, fingers crossed, you can't tell that was the case. But that was really fun learning experience to have.
The stripper scene with Aaron was hilarious to do. Obviously, it was difficult not to laugh because Aaron's in front of you doing a striptease with no music. It was literally in silence. But I knew for Aaron that I didn't want to laugh because I didn't want him to have to do it over and over again, because I knew as hard as it was for me, it must have been 10 times harder for him to have to do that in front of everyone. But thankfully, we got through it in maybe I think it was about 2 takes, because I knew in my head, I was like, I need to do this for Aaron more than anything else.
We had Michaela fighting herself at one point, which was really fun, because I always thought I love to do that kind of thing. It's a really easy effect to do, but really effective, because all you need to do is split screen and get the actor fighting themselves and then get a double in. So we actually ended up using Anna Bennett Squire, who was our production manager, who is not an actor, and she loved the chance to get a wig on, get the clothes on, and actually fight Michaela. So she did all the doubling for Michaela when you see she's fighting herself, and then it was just simple split screen tricks really and editing, but it works so well and it's such a fun scene to do.
No one steals my look.
DDFX Studios were the amazing people behind all of the monsters in Book of Monsters. Mark, Paul and Natasha were an absolute joy to work with, and what they gave was a real craftsmanship in the practical effects. All the deaths you see on screen, all the monsters, all the blood, the guts, the gore, and there's a lot, was all of those guys. They worked very closely with Stuart and myself in the pre-production stage to work out what kind of deaths we wanted and how it would practically work. Not just a crazy outlandish idea, but how we would execute this on the budget that we had. Everything that they gave us on set was to such a high level, it really instantly elevated the film beyond our wildest dreams. The monsters are one of our strongest aspects for the whole movie.
Working with the practical effects was something that I'd never done before. And these costumes and the creatures, they were scary. They were scary to work with. And I think it really helped my performance because I was able, you could see it. It wasn't just, look at that and pretend it's this. So it was great to be able to actually know what I was looking at and what was about to kill the people that were right in front of me.
Paul, Mark and Natasha were absolutely amazing at making the creatures and executing the gory effects where people were being ripped in half and eaten. But ultimately, you've only got one shot of these things. So when the guy gets ripped in half, we can only do it once because all the latex tendrils and fake blood are gonna go and it's gonna take another half an hour to reset. So a lot of practice, a lot of patience was required, but the payoff of having practical effects that you can reach out and touch and the actors can get attacked by is worth every penny.
I remember one of the first days on set was maybe halfway through the film, so at this point the monsters had attacked, and so I needed to have blood on me, and on a regular basis I would hear, oh, we need the blood cannon for Lindsay, and that's not a sentence that you you get used to hearing, but yeah, it was hilarious to just constantly be shot with a blood cannon outside, and then until eventually you got to the scene where, okay, this is the bit where you're gonna get covered in that blood. But yeah, the blood was sticky and it was fine, but you got used to it after a while, weirdly. But it was great because, obviously for a portion of the film I got to carry around a chainsaw as well, which I became very comfortable with carrying around. I think that's what I love about Sophie as a character, is that at the start of the film she is so insecure and quiet, and then by the end she is carrying around a chainsaw and she's complete badass. And one of the final scenes where she kills the monster, I can remember Paul and Mark, one being sat on the floor, one sat up just behind the camera with the blood cannon and then some black goo. And I can remember Stuart saying, just get the chainsaw and hold it on and just kind of close your eyes and go for it, because we've got one take where we're just going to cover you in as much blood as you can imagine. So that was tricky to do because I knew I only had one take to do it in. And, when the blood hits your face, you immediately want to cringe or laugh, but obviously I had to stay in character. But also you do want to cry because you're covered in disgusting things.
We had Natalie Roback, who was our costume designer on The Creature Below. She did the same role on Book of Monsters, and she came up with these amazing, unique looks for all our characters. Sophie, Beth and Mona in particular have these amazing costumes that really kind of represent who they are as people. We tested those out in the Kickstarter campaign and made some slight adjustments for the film. And ultimately, she was there ready to go with all the costumes laid out, all the props laid out, so that when we were on set, she knew for every single scene what a character should be wearing, if they're supposed to have glasses on, a hat on, how ripped their shirt was supposed to be, how much blood they were supposed to have on at that time in the film. Because ultimately, films are shot out of order. There was no way we could have shot the film in order. So we, started with some really bloody stuff. And then the next scene, they had to be half as bloody, or they had to have no blood on them. So she was really amazing at keeping on top of all of that stuff, and her team as well.
Our director of photography was Hamish Sachs, who is an incredibly talented guy.
Hamish was just absolutely amazing, and him and his team, they were so fast at getting everything set up, because with independent film you've got to be quick because time is money.
Hamish is a perfectionist, which I'm sure he won't mind me say, because what he was always striving for was the absolute best that he could offer Stuart on the look for the film. We had a large crew for the studio shoot of about 30 people. He got into the rhythm of the pacing that we needed to shoot, the speed in which Stuart works and wants to capture and bounce off the actor's energy needed to be matched by the ability to rechange lights, move camera setups quickly and keep things as fluid and as energized as possible.
We also had Liam Gilchrist, who was our sound recordist on the film. He eventually went on to do the sound editing as well. He was an absolute trooper because he had to hold that boom pole as well. He didn't have his own boom operator because we just, on independent film, we just couldn't have that many crew members. So he did everything on that side. And he was always keen to get the best possible sound that he could get within some really crazy situations, especially on location, and you can hear planes and cars going past, and he would make sure that he did everything in his power to get amazing high quality recordings of all the cast and crew.
Check the back door.
You check the back door.
So we shot for 13 days in the studio, which was an amazing experience. You got real camaraderie with the crew because everyone was kind of in the same space. Everyone went out for lunch together, and then they were all going into the next shoot, and it was just a really fun experience because it was just like it was coming home every day, which was really fun. We then shot on location for 2 days in Lincolnshire.
We really wanted to make sure that the film didn't feel contained. A lot of the location shooting was outside. It was at night. That comes with its own challenges.
Shooting on location is always a challenge because we got very comfortable in that studio, but shooting on location where you're up against the weather and you're up against the sun coming up was a massive challenge. But luckily, again, everyone just put their all in there, and because everyone's so passionate about it, they just got it done. So we overcame a lot of challenges on that. Ultimately, the scenes that you'll see, we've got Gary in the bathroom with the monster abomination at the end, was shot in this house. We also had the weapons room, the secret weapons room was in there as well. And then we had Michaela running around an old disused barn being chased by the slasher where she encounters Helga, which is one of my favourite scenes in the film. The Helga scene was really interesting actually because that was one thing we'd never fully committed to in the script. We knew that Mona was going to come across a party goer who had escaped the carnage from earlier in the movie, but that we hadn't necessarily seen before. And originally we thought, oh, we'll have like a really drunk girl there who just has no idea what's going on. She's woke up in the barn because she's got so drunk. But we just thought, it's not funny enough, we need something really funny. And luckily we knew Julia, and she's a very talented actress, and she's from Germany, so she speaks German. And we thought, oh, it would be a really fun idea if there's a German exchange student, because again, in a lot of American kind of teen movies, you've got that exchange student who doesn't really get the language and they get into lots of hijinks. We flipped on its head a bit and we had the German character who could understand English. She was fully aware of the situation, she was very in control of it, but Michaela's the one who's kind of panicking and is really convinced she knows what's right, but because she doesn't understand, there's a bit of a language barrier and that causes a bit of fun. Again, Hamish made it look absolutely amazing, and that was one of my favourite scenes in the movie.
The house that we were filming in was about to be knocked down, so you can imagine it wasn't in a great state. It was very cold compared to being indoors, but it was great to get that experience of working on location. You know, there was a lot to film in such a short amount of time, but at that point we'd worked together so much that we knew how quick we needed to get things done, and I felt like I'd learned a lot about Sophie at that point, so I knew how she'd react in those kind of situations. One of the scenes that I really enjoyed was when just after the weapons room where we fight the slasher monster, because it's a real moment where the girls are really kicking ass, and you know, Mona comes back, and there's that moment where we're like, is it Mona or is it not Mona? And the girls are back together and it's a trio and they're going to fight and be together, and poor Gary tries to get involved but he's kind of almost not in the group, but he is in the group. That was one of the really, really fun scenes to shoot because it was on location as well, and getting all the weapons involved, because Dan, who plays Gary, really helped me out with handling the chainsaw, because I know he'd done a lot of martial arts and things like that, so he knew how to handle weapons. So yeah, so that was a lot of fun to do.
Time is a constant enemy, and when we were filming our location shoot, unfortunately, we had to drop a scene, which was our police scene.
Initially, we'd written the scene where two policemen just kind of walk up with the torches and they end up getting killed by the slasher. And it was a really short throwaway scene just to show that, look, the police are not coming, you're screwed.
We went away after the location shoot a couple of weeks later and did a pickup shoot just for the police scene.
And then what we wanted to do was thought, well, let's have the police show up in a police car, and it's really cool, and they're gonna like go and investigate it, and then we can have a really cool death involving the car, and we can bring the slasher back and have the slasher in there.
Which was a crazy experience, really great fun, brilliant to be the other side of the camera and the other side of the script in some way.
We ended up getting Paul in the slasher suit, which was really fun because he couldn't breathe and he was moaning a lot, so that was hilarious for me. But we got Cal O'Connell, who's our co-producer, and we got Paul Toy, who's a great actor friend that we know, to play the two coppers. And that scene on its own just ended up being a really fun, like, you could use that as a little short film of its own of just two coppers showing up to a horror movie, essentially.
Oh, shit!
So moving into post-production, we'd finally finished filming in the studio, we finished filming on location, and I went into a period of hibernation on my own where I essentially had to edit the film together. And this is, it's one of the most exciting parts because you're kind of getting to see it really as it should be on screen and seeing all the scenes and how they all fit together. And some things unfortunately just weren't quite there. We'd kind of either overlooked them or on set due to scheduling and just timing, they had to either be cut down or cut out of the movie. So what we did is we made a list of pickups, which is shots that you need to get for the editing. So we had for Book of Monsters, for example, you would have shots of the book and you would have Lindsay's hands flicking the pages because at the time we thought, we didn't actually get enough footage over the shoulder of Lindsay turning the pages of the book. So we did a lot of footage of those. We never got on set the gnome burning in the microwave. We'd always thought, we need to get that later, so that was a pickup as well. One of the biggest pickups that we had to do, or reshoot in a way, was the opening scene of the movie with young Sophie and the mum. Initially, my direction to Sam, who plays the mum in the movie, was that her death should be really slow and laboured and painful and that she's slowly dragged under the bed. In my head, I thought it was a great idea. In execution, it unfortunately just didn't work when we got to the edit. And that's unfortunately something you've just got to face, that this doesn't work, how can we fix it? So what we did is, luckily we still had the bed that we used for the film, but the set was taken down by this point. So we essentially recreated a very small area of the room where you see the mum come in and she turns back to look at Sophie and she thinks there's something under the bed. That was all new stuff that we filmed with just the mum and just a few flats that were painted the same colour. Me and Paul went in and just painted ourselves, and Hamish ends up being that when the mum bends over to pick up the knife, that's just Hamish's bum, because ultimately you use what you have that costs you the least. So we got Sam back for a little bit. She did a much better kind of pull under the bed. We got her on a skateboard and dragged her under screaming.
So one of the scenes that we did on location was the basement scene where Sophie, Beth and Gary find the weapons room. Now this scene, as I said, was filmed on location. Now when it went into the edit, it wasn't quite getting across what Stuart and Paul wanted, so they decided to reshoot part of that scene. So when we came back to do the pickup, Hamish did an absolutely fantastic job with matching the lighting, because I don't think anyone knows that they were filmed on 2 completely separate days. So when Paul rewrote that, it was now a really emotional, really raw scene where Sophie finds a tape that her mother's recorded when she finds out that she's pregnant. And that was a particularly difficult scene to film because it was just myself and the camera. We didn't have the voice recording that the mother had done. I think Stuart had read the scene out loud, but it's difficult to kind of get yourself in that zone and to take myself back to the scene that we'd done on location, because I had to really get into the emotional state that I was in from what we'd done previously in the basement scene to make sure that it was fluid. And also I really wanted to commit to this scene because I wanted to do justice to what Paul had written, and hopefully I was able to portray that on screen, because I didn't want Sophie to break down too much, because I knew that she was still an introvert. She didn't want to make a huge scene in front of Beth and Gary, but also, it is emotional. She is hearing her mother's voice for the first time in 10 years. So I wanted to get that across. It's a real shift for Sophie, because she realizes that, this is it, she needs to fight back. She has to kill these monsters. She has to carry on her mother's legacy. And so there's that moment where she goes from being really upset to being like, right, we have to do this, and we're going to go and we're going to kill all these monsters, and we're going to fight.
And also we wanted a really good introduction shot to the movie. Initially it started with young Sophie just coming out of the door and walking down the corridor with the lightning, and she's got the book, and it just didn't feel like we were giving the book enough grandeur. It wasn't as big a deal as we wanted it to be. So we found a really cool attic space where we could film the girl point of view walking towards this old chest, and it was all creepy and there was lots of cobwebs, and Dave Walker did the music, just built it up so much so that when the chest finally opens, you see that book and the lightning flashes. It's just like this is interesting. This book means something. It's supernatural. And again, little things like that just added so much to the film.
So some of the other pickups that we did involved the scenes on the sofa where the police have just been killed, and we sit down and we look through the book, because we'd actually realised we hadn't done a lot of work with the book and looked through it and discussed the monsters and things like that. So that was kind of a big pickup for us. And that was really great to do, because one, we were able to some of the cast were able to come back together and we were able to see each other again. But also it just created more depth for each character and really kind of delved into the story and into the book. And I think what's incredible when you watch it back is that you would have no clue that they were filmed on separate days. There was myself, Lizzie and Hannah, but then in the film it cuts to the wide and you've got Anna and Michaela there. Shooting those pickups, kind of remembering that those two characters are next to you but they're not next to you. So that's just testament to the editing of the film and just how well that all links in together.
If I was a monster hunter, I'd have kept a shotgun above a fireplace.
One of the biggest things was when the monster attacks, for example. You have this whole series of sequences where Gary runs outside, you've got Mona and Jess in the bedroom, you've got Sophie and Beth behind the sofa, and all these scenes kind of intercut. Initially, when we'd edited together, they were all very long scenes and we didn't cut away to the other action that was going on for quite a while. So it felt like everything wasn't really connected. And what we found just by doing some simple cutting up of the scenes and placing them adjacent to each other based on certain actions, it works so much better. So when they're in the bedroom and they react to the monster roaring, we made that the guy screaming being eaten alive, which then we cut to Sophie and Beth and they're looking at the guy being eaten alive. And then we cut to the kitchen and we see that they're reacting to that sound as well. And it makes it feel like they're all in the same environment and they're all connected. But originally in the original edit and the original script, that wasn't the case at all. Whilst there was some intercutting, it just wasn't as frantic and fast-paced, and it made the film slow down a bit too much. So really it just helped the pacing enormously. We also ended up taking out a few scenes which we'd originally filmed, which is always really painful because ultimately you remember spending a whole day filming that scene, and when you've got to cut it, you just don't want to, but ultimately you've just got to do what's right for the movie. So we actually had a scene set just after the police scene where Sophie and Jess go up to Sophie's bedroom because Sophie really wants to kind of know what happened in here. As far as the audience knows, Mona has been replaced by Shapeshifter Mona, and the real Mona's potentially been thrown out a window. So Sophie's in the room kind of picking up a bit of the pieces, and we deliver a bit more plot information. It was really a chance because ultimately, up to this point, Sophie and Jess had kind of fallen out because Sophie had seen Jess was kind of involved in Aria hiring the stripper and embarrassing her, and she felt betrayed because she kind of formed a bit of a bond with her earlier in the party. So it was Sophie confronting Jess on that and talking about, why do you hang out with these people? And Jess kind of reaffirming that she's there for Sophie, that she is interested in her, especially as the love interest. But ultimately, when we watched it in the context of the film, a load of people had just been killed by the monster. It really wasn't the type of thing that two people would be having a conversation about in terms of their priorities at that point. So it just had to go. And it did have a really cool scene where we had Dave, Hawaiian shirt Dave, who was the virgin sacrifice. His body was under the bed and he was kind of reanimated and becoming the abomination we later see in the bathroom at the end, and he chases them down the corridor. That would have been really cool to have, but ultimately it just didn't work, so it had to go, and that's just a sacrifice that we had to make, really. Our post-production team on the sound side of things was amazing. So Liam and Max were doing the sound design, sound editing, working in tandem with Dave Walker, who is Kyoto Dragon. He's our composer for the movie. I worked with him before on Creature Below. He just did an amazing job. We had to have him back, and his soundtrack is absolutely amazing for this movie. We really wanted to channel that 80s vibe. There's a lot of retro wave, a lot of synth, but at the same time, Dave's as big a fan of 80s and 90s horror as we are, so there's music tracks in there that kind of honor Reanimator, Aliens, The Thing, and it just extends that love of horror and 80s retro stuff that we wanted to get across into, and it bleeds into the soundscape as well. You can see it all the way from the action scenes to the quieter, more scary stuff. It just really enhances the film, and especially as the editor of the movie, having watched it hundreds of times without music and sound design, to suddenly have those elements slot into place and to work with those guys in the sound studio mixing it in 5.1, that's when the film really came together, and I was sat there with a big smile on my face by the end. We were also lucky enough to have Jeff Blythe back with us. Jeff did the visual effects on The Creature Below, which was mostly CGI work. We knew for this film we wanted to go all practical effects, so what stuff Jeff did was very subtle, and he worked very closely with Cal O'Connell, who was our co-producer, who also did a lot of visual effects work on the film. So you've got stuff like the police car exploding. We couldn't have done that on our budget, and it just wasn't safe. But things like that, which normally, you'd be able to tell if they were CGI, we just were creative with them. So the police car explodes in the reflection of a window where your eye is more drawn to the girl's reaction than the police car. So you get away with that stuff and it falls just into the background of the movie and you just accept it as it is. Jeff and Cal did some subtle stuff. So when Steph is transforming as Pandora into the shapeshifter, there's some subtle bone movements and muscle movements under the skin, which again, you may not even notice, but your brain does hopefully see, and it enhances the transformation effects. There's even really subtle stuff that when Pandora kind of cricks her neck back to transform into Mona, her hair colour changes the same colour as Michaela, and things like that really subtle stuff, but it just adds to the whole thing. Another key thing that happens during post-production, especially in the final stages, is the colour grading of the movie. Hamish, again, who was the director of photography, took on board the role of colourist, which was great because he shot the film in mind for colour grading it in a particular style. So he was able to go in at that kind of final stage and make the film look extra special. It really does look Hollywood level to me, at least. It just, from looking at the raw footage to going to the final colour graded material, the film just looks $1 million, and I couldn't be more happy with it. One of the key parts of making films, which independent filmmakers really need to be aware of, is marketing your movie. It's such a key element of it that often gets overlooked. One thing that we really wanted to do, because we were riffing off of the 80s vibe, is have a poster that would match that, because the poster's the thing that you see that gets you to watch the movie. You'll be scrolling through your streaming service and you'll see the image, and it's that image that makes you go, oh, that looks interesting, I'll just click on that and watch the trailer. We'd been a big fan of the Dude designs for many years, hand-painted, hand-drawn style poster artwork, and he came up with just some amazing concepts for the poster and eventually nailed that look that we wanted to go for, and the compliments that we've had for that poster have just been fantastic, and it really makes you think, wow, this is a fun 80s movie filled with monsters, and it's just done an amazing job. When the film was finally finished, it was time to send it out to film festivals, and obviously our first port of call was Frightfest, and it was always one of the big goals for me and Paul when we made the film was we've got to get into Frightfest. We love the audience, we're big fans of the festival ourselves. It's such an amazing place to go and take your film and get good feedback and reception from people. So we submit the film, and thankfully they agreed to show it.
So we all packed ourselves up from Yorkshire and went down to London. We had lots of cast and lots of crew come to the premiere, which was great. It was like a big reunion, real fun, vibrant atmosphere. We actually managed to sell out our screening at Frightfest, which was brilliant for us because it was a big thank you to Ian and to the guys at Frightfest to say thank you for putting us on. The screening itself is always nerve-wracking for any creative who's involved, but it was a real joy. People were laughing at the right bits, they were wincing at the right bits, they were cheering. It was a really vibrant experience, and it was the best way to see our film for pretty much the entire cast and crew. This was the first time they saw the movie, so it was a really electric experience for everyone involved and great fun.
Getting into Frightfest I knew was a huge goal for Stuart and Paul, and for myself as well, because I knew that obviously they got in with The Creature Below, and I was there to experience that with them, and I definitely want to experience that with being such a big part of this film. So I was absolutely delighted when I found out that we'd got in, and so when we went for the premiere, it was one of the best days of my life. It really was. Just being on stage with the cast and with Stuart and Paul, and just seeing the audience and just seeing how they enjoyed it, and they were laughing in the right places, and they were sympathising with Sophie in the right places, which was great to watch back. It was obviously a surreal for me to watch myself on a cinema screen.
Yeah, it was an out-of-body experience, but to know that people actually enjoyed the film and they got what we were trying to do with it was worth it. It really was. Every day working on
on Book of Monsters was amazing. It was literally a dream come true production. Everyone was so passionate, and it was really, you know, the day was 8 a.m. till 8 p.m, but it felt like you were there for 2 hours. It just flew. Everyone just really got into their role. Stuart and Paul they'd scheduled everything just to the T, and you know, there was no waiting around. You were just constantly on set, and you could see how much passion they had in this production, and you wanted to equal that. You wanted to really push yourself and make sure that you did your role justice. And I think everyone had that in mind. But I know I certainly wanted to do the very best that I could for them, because I was just so grateful that they'd given me this opportunity.
So the whole experience of Book of Monsters was an absolute joy. Probably incredibly stressful, I would say, as well. But a real labour of love in which we got to work with some incredible people. Everyone gave 110% throughout, and we got an amazing film at the end of it. We, myself and Stuart, are hopefully upcoming filmmakers, still working at a relatively low budget, but we're learning lessons as we go, and we're making connections and working with great people. If you're a filmmaker yourself, and if you've never made a feature film before, or if you are thinking about getting into this, all I would suggest is just do it. Get great people around you who are just as passionate and just as willing to learn and make something cool, and just go ahead, because filmmaking is a joy. It's an incredible experience. It's a bonding experience with those that you create it with, and you can make some brilliant stuff at the end of it. I just hope we can show that it's possible on a low budget. It's possible with people who aren't maybe as experienced or haven't been around the industry for millenniums. You've just got to get out there and do it.
Having the film now out there, and hopefully you're now watching this behind the scenes on the release of the movie, is fantastic. We couldn't be happy with the response of the movie, and couldn't be happy that you're now watching it on DVD or video on demand. And yeah, just thank you to everyone who supported us on Kickstarter, and to the festivals that have hosted the movie. We couldn't be more appreciative of all the support that we've had from the horror community as well, and hopefully this won't be the end of the Book of Monsters story, so maybe you'll see more from it soon.